When nothing means everything, don't worry.
Brene Brown once said, one day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be someone else's survival guide. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, guests. My story began in December 2012, shortly after I turned 50. I was in the shower, rinsing off my face, and I felt a sharp, intense pain on my cheek and on my eye socket. And over the next several months, it got progressively worse. I went to my ENT, I went to my dentist, and finally in March of 2013, I was diagnosed with what's hatefully known as the suicide disease. Medically, it's called trigeminal neuralgia, a problem with the nerves in your brain. Now, this rare condition has no known cause, no known cure, and no guaranteed medical treatment to reduce or eliminate the condition. In my personal experience, I didn't know what would trigger these pain episodes. I didn't know how long they would last. I didn't know how bad they would be. And sometimes they would be really bad. In fact, there were times when I had relief, and those were great, but for the most part, I couldn't smile. I couldn't eat. I couldn't open my mouth wide to take a bite of my favorite meal, a cheeseburger. I was afraid to cry. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't hug. I couldn't feel. I couldn't kiss. In fact, most of the time I didn't even want to speak. And I'm in sales and Toastmasters. And then in February of 2020, after a particularly bad experience with yet another drug to try to reduce or eliminate the pain, I had a very negative reaction. Couldn't sleep for 4 days, sat bolt upright in my bed in excruciating pain. And I had to ask my 16-year-old son to take me to the ER to try to find some relief. That was the worst day ever. So the hospital morphined me up, sent me home to rest. And when my wife got back from being out of town, she set about finding a friend of a friend of a friend whose father had the same condition that I had. And I called him up, and he told me, John, you gotta go to this neurosurgeon at Duke University. Now, in the 7 years of having this condition, our research and the research of my friends all around the world, these two entities, Duke and this neurosurgeon, neither one of them showed up in these searches as having any expertise. But we were desperate, and they had an opening 2 weeks later. We went in for a consult, and serendipitously, 2.5 weeks after that, they had an opening for surgery. And so it was, March 5th, 2020, I had brain surgery. Keep in mind, 2 weeks after that, all elective surgeries in North Carolina were canceled. And mine was considered elective. After the 5.5-hour surgery, the surgeon comes in and looks at me and he asks me, he goes, do you have any pain? So finding my humor, I said, well, yeah, you just cut a 6-inch hole in my skull. Not that pain, John. So I started touching my face. And then I really started touching my face. And you know what I felt? Nothing. Nothing. That was fantastic. 36 hours after surgery, brain surgery, I was home. A couple months later, I'm in the living room watching TV with my son, recovering, Ted Lasso. The last episode of the last scene of the last episode of the first season, I am watching it and I am laughing so hard, tears are streaming down my face. Now, I don't know if Ted Lasso is that funny. I think he's funny. But it might have been that I haven't been able to laugh like that for 7 years. My son is filming me, and when he's done, he sends it around to the family and says, Dad is laughing. He hadn't seen me laugh like that since he was 9. We love spring in North Carolina because of all the pollen. We're sitting around the kitchen table, and I sneezed. And it was as quiet at that table as it is in this room. They stopped mid-chew. Their utensils were mid-air, and they all looked at me, waiting to see what would happen. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Last story. My wife came in to my hospital room after surgery, and she bent down and kissed me on my lips. And that was the first time in 7 years that I've not reeled in excruciating pain. And you know what I felt at that time? Everything. Desmond Tutu once said, "Hope is being able to see the light despite all the darkness." I had 7 years of darkness, and hope is what carried me through. Carried me through to this time, and to that time, when nothing meant everything. God bless you.